Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be talking about this. I'm going to try to stay as close on time as possible. Please do keep your questions to the end. Feel free to take notes. I'm willing to talk about just about everything I can reveal. And some of the stuff that you ask me, if I don't know the answer, I'll try to be honest and tell you I have no bleaking clue. So let's get started. Got out of school in '96. I assisted 4 other photographers for about 4 years. Was shooting jobs as soon as I got out of school, but it wasn't enough to survive. And I landed some decent work. Assisting-wise, I was Timothy Greenfield Sanders' first assistant for about a year. We went to the White House together, LA. White House was a little bit of fun. It was 3 days before Clinton's scandal broke. And we were shooting Al Gore, and at one point, Timothy wanted to get one more shot of Vice President Gore and started running down the hallway towards the Oval Office, and the Secret Service is kind of going like this. And I hear the publicist in the back going, "No!" So anyways, Timothy survived. We all got out of there alive. The other assistant did manage to knock over the 8x10 in the curb, and I never forgave him for it, but yeah. So about 2000, I get a stock contract with Getty. And through that, they started funding photo shoots for me. And I was able to start traveling, producing shoots. They were paying for it, picking up the production cost. And that was what started funding my photography. And along with that, one of the free magazines that I was shooting for, their photo editor got picked up by a tech magazine. They just relaunched their branding. It was this direct-to-business magazine called anyways. Different computer magazine, sorry. They had just redesigned with someone that had done the redesign on ESPN, and he brought me in for the relaunch of the cover shoot. And between those 2 clients, literally I had enough to stay afloat as a photographer. And then worked along the way, and that is, we're now, 15, 16 years into surviving on licensing fees and assignment work. So while we were traveling around, I went to Africa, photographed in Niger for a couple of weeks, came back with a body of work, and my editor had left Getty and gone to Photonica, and I'm now at 4 different agencies. And my editor at Photonica was like, "This is great, but we really kind of, for licensing purposes, we need a body of work that has got more of a human footprint on it." And I'm like, "Oh, so more like industrial landscape?" And she's like, "Exactly." And I was like, "That's great, because that's like the stuff that I used to want to shoot, but thought that there wasn't a way to make it viable." And so we started driving around and looking for photo shoots that we didn't have a lot of difficult getting into, just like highways, parking lots, stuff and everything. Fences that were easy to climb over or to shoot over, and just started finding these locations. So along this path, we're also shooting lifestyle, because everyone keeps on pushing, you gotta shoot people, you gotta shoot lifestyle. I was never a really good lifestyle photographer. It was okay, but I was doing it for stock, and it was licensing, but it looked a little stockish. But we still had a nice time. This was in Austria. This is in northern Italy. This was one of the kind of man-made industrial landscapes that I was able to find. This was just off of the highway. Went down to see if there was advantage to shoot. Fortunately, there was already a hole in the fence. Got my tripod through, got my 4x5, and spent about an hour figuring out how to shoot this. The farmer was there. He saw me. He didn't give a shit if I was doing this or not. So this is an outtake from a wedding. Creative director at BBDO hired me to shoot his sister's wedding, and on the off day, this is what I went out and found. And I found this coal-firing plant in Tennessee, and it was one of the largest coal-firing plants in the U.S. And this is like the sludge lake that I was standing on in this barrier wall. And I found it after this wall collapsed a couple of years ago. So this picture is titled 2 Million Houses. This was another one of these drive-by. I found this construction site in Virginia. It was in the process of an old farm that was being converted into McMansions. Like the Home Depot was getting built, the TGI Friday was getting installed in the corner, and they were building these gigantic houses. And this was just like some of the textural stuff that I was attracted to. And I just told them, I'm just shooting for personal work and everything. Do you mind? Like, yeah, it's fine. So we usually would travel with like a 4-foot stepladder and a tripod and my 4x5 and a couple of other cameras. And so this picture is actually in the show at NYU right now, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So like I said, I was shooting some lifestyle and the industrial landscape. I had 2 separate portfolios that I was traveling around. I had 11x14 book of the industrial landscape. I had a book of lifestyle. And at a meeting with the art buyer for Exxon, she said to me, like, we love the industrial landscape, but until I have you with a guy holding a wrench in an industrial location, we are not going to be able to put this in front of Exxon. And I finally accepted that fact because I was always trying to keep the industrial landscape away from the people because like the people was kind of like my commercial life and everything. And I was like, to hell with it. Let's go ahead and make that jump, dump all of the snowballs, get rid of that work, and focus on shooting people in the environment that I actually like working in. And so we put an ad out on Craigslist, hired a couple actors. This was an actor that we picked up in Craigslist. We had found this location in New Jersey, and it was just these rail cars that were sitting there. But I was like, this is great. And so we just went out there, set up the shoot, boom, boom. So while we're out there, we spot this. Now, while this whole project is going on, I've got this industrial landscape work. I've been picked up by a gallery in Williamsburg, and through that, through a portfolio review that PDN had set up, I met a book agent, and she was interested in publishing a book with me, and I was like, that sounds great, but I don't think I've got a body of work right now that'll make it into an actual coffee table book, because this was kind of a self-publishing option. It was like I needed something cohesive that a publisher was going to pick up and agree to make. So based on the existing random industrial landscape images, we came up with the idea to focus on the recycling industry. It was something I was interested in. It gave a framework. We locked it in just to be in the 50 states. I hired a writer, did this project titled American Reclamation. We started shooting, and I'll show you some of those work as well. So once I spotted this, I had read about the artificial reef project in the New York Times, and it was just when this project had started, and I saw the last red bird being dumped in the ocean, and I was just like, oh God, this would have been awesome. And then when I saw this, I was like, what are those? And they're like, oh, it's the MTA's artificial reef project. And again, a little conviction, and just like, wow, that's great. Let's go and follow this. And so I showed them the existing work, and I told them I'd like to include it in the recycling project because it's all about the repurposing of the materials. They thought that it sounded good. They introduced me to the MTA, brought me down to the yard, and so I was able to start photographing that. But I'm going to keep on linking back to that. So Weeks and I start building a working relationship. We're getting along pretty well, and they call me, and they're like, we're doing a shipbreaking project out in New Jersey. There was a ferry that sank in Weehawken. And so I went out to photograph it. It was a little bit of a tricky day, but this was one of the pictures that I've always liked from that. They were just dropping this 15,000-pound guillotine blade and breaking the ship up in the water. And so they would just pound the crap out of it and then use this claw to pick up the debris and load that into a barge. So that was fun. So after that job, Weeks calls me. And I was like, hey, I know this is in the train. It's not a recycling project, but tomorrow we're picking up this. So the Concorde was parked in New Jersey for a couple of years while they were working on the Intrepid and getting that refurbished and everything. So they asked me to come down and ended up commissioning this project to follow the Concorde coming back to the Intrepid. So I got to ride with it. It was a lot of fun. So January 15th, 2009 is my wife's birthday. We're sitting in a bar watching the monitors with the airplane floating down the Hudson River. And the news is coming out and everything, and the reports are coming in that everybody survived. And so it's like, this is sounding great and everything. And I'm pretty sure it was not a voice in my head, but somebody actually at the bar said, I wonder how they're going to get the plane out. And I was like, I know who's going to do this. Weeks Marine has the largest rotating crane on the eastern seaboard. And so I called my contact there and said, are you guys doing the salvage operation? And he answered that night, and he called me back, and he was like, I don't know yet, but call Tom Weeks, because he will know in the morning, and I can't answer my phone because I'm going to be in a meeting with the Coast Guard and the FBI, so he's not going to be able to. I've always just loved that issue, It's like, sorry, I'm meeting with the FBI right now, I can't talk. So Tom answers the phone. Tom Weeks is the guy that owns all the cranes. They're a big salvage company and everything. It's like, hey, Tom, we met on the Concorde job. And it's like, oh, yeah, what's going on? Did you get the job? And he's like, what job? And it's like, well, the plane in the Hudson River. And he's like, yeah, do you want to come down? Do you want to work? So I jump into my car, put in the address for the wrong location on my brand new GPS, drive in circles in New Jersey for about 45 minutes. They're calling me like, where the hell are you? Where the hell are you? Finally get down there, and we come in via tugboat with a smaller crane. And so I came into this crash environment in a hard hat and a life jacket with my camera and started shooting for weeks. and ended up with exclusive access where all the other media was fenced off back away. And this is partially because they weren't yet sure if the plane was going to explode. It was still full of fuel. And the flash point was pretty low, but they still, like the fire department had set up water cannons all the way down where the plane was on the pier. So this was one of my favorite photographs from this shoot. It's titled, She's Out, She's Looking at You. I just always felt that this looks like a wounded animal, just, coming out of the water. This was also one of the photographs that got a lot of attention. It's the throttle control inside the cockpit. The story about this picture was that there was a ladder going up to the airplane in New Jersey. And I saw people going inside, and I asked the NTSB investigator, is it okay if I go in? And he's like, yeah, sure, it's fine. And I almost double-checked him, and I bit my tongue. I was like, okay. So I got in and was able to photograph inside the airplane, and I was the first photographer inside the aircraft. And so I sent an edit of this to a friend of mine, who then sent it to Rob Haggart at aphotoeditor.com. And it went viral really quickly. And CBS then did an interview with me. New York Magazine wanted to run it. And then NTSB called me and said, you need to take those photographs down, because the investigation wasn't finished yet, and they were a little concerned about it getting out. And so NTSB got a little spooked, but they were actually really kind about it. And then AIG called afterwards, who was less kind, who went, when I asked him, about the usage and everything, and they claimed because of the fact that I was a subcontractor of their aircraft, because AIG was the insurance agent on the Airbus 320, that I had to abide by their media rules. And I had never signed anything with anybody. So I was kind of to hell with you, but at the same time, I needed a little bit of leverage, because I looked up the lawyer that was emailing me, and he had graduated from law school before I was born. His clients were American Express, Visa. I was scared. So I put a post-it up on my website that just said, the photographs have been removed at the request of AIG. If you would like to contact them, here's their phone number, and here's US Airways press information. And again, they got a lot of crap for it, because it was a freedom of journalism issue with people, which is not exactly true, because this was a commissioned commercial job. But people still started getting really angry, like, what are you hiding? What's the cover up? All these issues. So the lawyer's answer went from no, nothing, nobody to, Mr. Mallon, how can we help you? And I explained what my usage was, that I just wanted it for the exhibition, self-promotion, and print sales. And they agreed to it as long as the logo was not visible. So there's a couple of images where we retouched out the logo, and we put the photographs back up, and Gawker caught it immediately, used the Wayback Machine, put up the old photo that had the logo on it. But that storm passed. AIG never went after me for anything. Weeks, I called Weeks, and they're like, yeah, our lawyer called. And I was like, sorry. And he's like, yeah, it's totally fine. We just wish you had waited until we had gotten paid. But I still shot for them again afterwards, so I think that all worked out all right. So yeah, so this became a photo essay. It's been a series of exhibitions, and on its own, and in group shows, and it's been licensed in a number of different places. And the Sunday London Times had picked it up, and it's been traveling. It won a couple of awards. And this was the coldest weekend in 30 years until last winter, which also I think is now going to get broken again tomorrow. But so we're out, and the ice had come down from the north of the Hudson River and everything. I set my glove on fire. It was one of those kerosene heaters for the construction. I set my hands down, and the glove started melting because I didn't feel the heat yet. This is the dive master for the job, and one of the things that I've always loved is that someone looked at this picture and he said, this is the happiest they've ever seen him. So here's the inside of the aircraft, and yeah, the hangars are still there. It's like the hotel stuff, it's like they're locked in. So getting back to this next project. So Flight 1549 goes down to Miami with a new gallery that has now picked me up, and new to me. They've been in business for 10 years at that point, but they stole me from the other gallery, which at the time I didn't realize was happening, because I went to my dealer and I was like, hey, guess what? Front Room wants to give me a solo show. And I didn't realize that meant that she was going to have to lose me because they were like a block and a half away from each other. But we go down to Miami, and the subway cars that I had shot were actually selling at Miami already. And they were like, if you flush this out a little bit, we may be able to give you another solo show. And I was like, all right. So I went back to the MTA in weeks and everything and asked, can I come back and shoot a couple more of the reefs? They were doing it about once a month. They dumped over 2,500 subway cars in the Atlantic over the span of 10 years. And this was signed off by the EPA. It's paid for by the tourism boards of different cities. And so they take out the Freon, the motors, all the heating and cooling systems, the seats and the windows and everything. And so I followed this project on and off for those 3 years. So different drop zones we did: Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina. They did a drop in Georgia that I didn't go to, unfortunately. But yeah, we went out. There was sometimes there would be other boats in the area, and I would just kind of like meander myself over to crop them out. The vantage point that I had was that I was on this separate crew boat, because we would meet up with the tugboat out in the Atlantic, and they would get off to operate the excavator. And I would have the captain then position me based on the light and what they were doing. So I was able to kind of like spin around the barge, get me here, get me close, get me tight, and was just able to create a nice like variety and a full body of work from this. So the title of this picture is Shallow. I've always kind of imagined that this is like the narcissistic moment of the subway car, looking at itself and like, oh, I'm so pretty. So this image is titled Splish. And we were towards the end of the project, and I had a lot of images of the subway car going off gently down and stuff and everything. And I asked them, can you give me a little bit more of a splash on the next one? And so they picked it up at an angle, and this excavator that they had was incredibly powerful, and they literally just went and flicked it off, and so it went up kind of, and I've got like all the frames where it's like, and then it comes about here, and then goes back and hits the side of the barge, and that was like the scariest noise, and I was like, oh, sorry. And they were like, yeah, don't worry about it. You've done much worse. So this is titled Pool. I've just always liked the color palette or the aquescent qualities of the water in the air coming out. So these pictures, again, start winning some awards. We're traveling with some shows, and then they get picked up at the New York Times. So the New York Times Metro section publishes this a few years ago, and I call my contact at the MTA, and he's like, that's awesome, that sounds great, and by the way, I don't know if you're interested, but they're sinking a destroyer. And I'm like, really? Because I thought he had mentioned it, and I thought we had missed the timing and everything. He's like, no, it's still ongoing. So he got me in touch with this salvage company, and I told them about what I'm doing and who's interested in the work and everything, and like they're like, that sounds great. So why don't you come down? And so they got me onto the destroyer, and I actually went out with them when they sank it. So this is one of the photographs from that series. This is actually a dry dock in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, just right next to where they were prepping the destroyer. I've just always loved this photograph. I asked the operator of the dry dock if it was okay to photograph it, and he was like, yeah, sure, it's fine. And one of my questions always has been, is like, whose office is there? So the way that they sank the ship is that they prepped it, they pull all the motors, much of the metal off, they take the propeller off because it's a lot of copper, it's really valuable for recycling. They fill the fuel tanks. This is a destroyer that had a base for helicopters to get pulled into, and so those hatches there are fuel cells. And so they're filled with like gravel and cement to level it out when it's sinking. And then once we got out on site, they started cutting more holes in the side of the ship, which was that earlier image. And then they also just had a lot of pumps. And so they brought these pumps on and started filling the ship with water. And so periodically, the construction guys were walking by, and it's like, the ship is sinking, right? And I'm just like, yeah. I'm just like, you're here. It's perfectly fine. So I have a strong attachment to sparks. I don't know why, if it's the old like kid fire thing with ants and stuff, but just like I'm always happy when I've got somebody welding or cutting something. This is some of the scrap metal. And there she is. So this is also part of one of the Delaware reefs. This was the largest ship that they've sunk to date in the actual Atlantic Ocean on this side. They did do a aircraft carrier in the Florida Bay, but it was this is the largest ship to date in the on the East Coast. So with these projects going along, licensing, still promoting my work, and this connection actually came up through ASMP through a judging seminar. I was on the board. We were not allowed to submit, but we were there during the judging process. And one of the judges that was replacing somebody that I actually had ended up staying in touch with me, and he was on the campaign for Whirlpool and Maytag. And so when he saw the industrial work, he said he'd been wanting to do this with his client for a long time. And so he brought my work in front of them. They liked the idea of it. They were about to do a gut renovation of this plant in Ohio. It was an old American assembly plant that's been running for 30 years, and they were about to renovate some of the assembly line and automate more of the process. And so they got me in, and I documented it for like 5 or 6 different shoots. They keep on flying me back. It was wonderful. But this has always been one of my favorite images from that, because it's like this Willy Wonka-esque assembly line. And this is the paint crew. So Weeks and I are still working together. They call me, when they're doing something kind of interesting, and they call me because they're moving a chimney to a power plant. And I was like, that sounds cool. So I go down there, and at the same time, the 5D Mark II has hit the market at this point, and people are starting to ask about shooting video. And I was terrified of video because it just seemed so overwhelming. I had dated a video editor before, the one that I had gone to Africa with. I kind of skip some of the details of that. It's a horrible mess. So I saw how much work it took for her to get anything done, and I was like, I don't want to get involved with video. I want to be a photographer. But with the 5D Mark II coming, I've always equated it to the commercial side of people asking, do you shoot film? Or sorry, what I meant is when digital cameras, when the Canon Mark IIs started hitting the market, and the 5D Mark I in particular started hitting, and the cost of shooting digital started dropping, clients were starting to ask, do you shoot digital? And for a while, you could say no, and it was fine. You would still deliver context sheets or Chrome or whatever. And I feel now, if you don't discuss that with the client ahead of time, that you're going to shoot film on a project, they're going to be really surprised when they get a context sheet out of you. It's like they're assuming that you're shooting digital. And I felt that it was going to be happening with video as well. Not so much that it was going to be one or the other. It was just that people are going to be calling saying, do you shoot video? And if I said no, they were going to turn to somebody that knew how to. So this comes along, and I'm realizing that this actually may be an opportunity where there's actual subject matter that I'm interested in and can kind of concentrate on. And so I went with myself and one assistant. We had 2 cameras and set up a little mini time-lapse shoot. And this film looks good. It just never finished correctly because we got the chimney to the power plant, and I never went back to shoot the whole. And so the film kind of never went live anywhere. But fortunately, they called me again. And they're like, hey, I don't know if you're interested, but we're going to be moving a bridge. So this actually made, now I had a much better sense of how to do a decent job on the storytelling. This bridge was built outside of Albany. And so we went up and time-lapsed the process of it from there and then shot it along the river. You can see how that all happened. So after that film came out, I got a phone call from the communications director at the Department of Transportation. And she was like, hey, I just saw your film, because it went viral again. The Wall Street Journal picked it up. It got into a half a dozen film festivals. And she was like, hey, 2 things. That's our bridge. And second of all, why does your film look so much better than the one that I paid for? And I went in and met the director of communications there, and we bid on the purchase order to start doing the video work for them, and ended up winning the job. And so they've been a return client now for 3 years, and we're in our 3rd contract with them. And it's also branched off into the Taxi and Limousine Commission, and also I've got a relationship developing with the Parks Department. So one of the good things about keeping my work kind of tightly focused on this is that people start recognizing when to call me about stuff like this. And we were in Miami for the art fairs, and I got a phone call from Fortune magazine, and they're like, hey, can you go to Brazil for us next week? I was like, yeah. They sent me out for a week to do a story on Petrobras. And so they flew me down, and then we went out to one of the largest deep water drilling platforms off of the coast of Brazil. Went out there via helicopter, shot on it for half a day. We were supposed to be there longer, but a storm came in and pulled us out early. This was one of those times where I'm really, really thankful that I shot all of my scout images with a real camera, because literally we broke for lunch, and they're like, "You're leaving," and that was the end of the shoot. And there was no way around it. It was like, the helicopter's coming, you have to go because there's a storm and you can't stay. But it was an awesome shoot. We got into the refinery and got up high and just did everything that I like doing, because I had pretty much full range. They're just like, yeah, just shoot what you want. So I was able to find these like textural maps and all this different stuff that I like doing. So the water treatment, you can see the semi down there. To give you a little bit of sense of the scale. So, excuse me. After the week's film, the film and motion people started noticing, and I met an editor at an ASMP New York portfolio review for the Wall Street Journal, and he liked the work a lot, and I had shown him the Willis Avenue Bridge, and so they brought me in to do another time-lapse project for them, and this was the construction of their first new roller coaster in Coney Island. It was the first new roller coaster being built in 70 years, and so we just went back and forth. They didn't have a lot of money, but we'd just go for like a day, and we'd set up a camera here and a camera there and stuff, and it was just like me and one assistant, pretty chill. This was one of the remote shots. This is one of the things that I learned about being around cranes a lot. It's really not smart to be under anything that's heavy, hanging above you from a wire. So we would just start setting up more and more remote cameras. So we got this, I'm not there, and we set up the intervalometer, let it shoot. A lot of this footage gets dumped, tons and tons of it, but you do end up getting some amazing photographs. And this is the last piece of the roller coaster, and these are the guys putting it together. So after that, Smithsonian Magazine calls me, and they asked me to come in to shoot a new destroyer. So this is in a shipyard in Bath, Maine. Great place, great old industrial American shipyard. Working on the seams. I wasn't allowed to, there were certain things I wasn't allowed to photograph in there. I wasn't allowed to shoot the side view of the ship because it's all a module construction. So they wheel it in on these crazy semis and then weld the whole thing together. But I was never allowed to shoot the side of the ship because they said that structurally you'd be able to see a way to possibly harm the vessel out to sea. So, but I was able to shoot around the ship and everything. This is like a detail of the side of the ship. And when I say detail, it's probably like, this wall. But this image has also made it into the NYU show. It's a little flat on this one, sorry. So, a nice thing about having the Intrepid working relationship in Weeks Marine and everything is that when they won the contract on getting the Enterprise, we were able to go and photograph the space shuttle. And so we were out on the runway. My co-shooter is shooting video at this point. I'm shooting stills. And this is the 747 doing a flyby at JFK. And just to give you a sense, this is shot with the 100 to 400 lens at about 120 with me leaning back like crazy. It was close. But yes, we rode with it. This is right after they hit the bridge with the space shuttle. They had to pick it up and lower the landing gears because they had to change the way it was displayed. So this is another project for the DOT. This is the rebuild of the Roosevelt Island Bridge. And this was one of the first assignments with them. This was actually the marathon because we did a project on the Staten Island ferry and its involvement on the New York City Marathon because they moved like 25,000 people, I think, to the start of the race. That was our first film for them, and this was just one of the stills. This was on a Scout. This was on a project that unfortunately got canceled, but they recabled the entire Manhattan Bridge and replaced all the suspension cables without ever closing it. And they would just leapfrog it along for 4 years, and they replaced all the cables. And they only do this once every 50 years for the bridges in New York. But due to some timing issues and some security, the bridges department ended up killing this project. And I think if you guys all saw the German artist that went up there and put the bleached out American flag on top of the Brooklyn Bridge without getting caught. So they've kind of hurt my access by showing some of their vulnerability. And this is inside the sign shop where they're painting the parking signs. And this is a row of the silk screens for all the painting in there. This is another time-lapse still. We did a film on the milling and paving of New York. We had started this pre-Sandy, and then Sandy happened, and it got delayed, and ended up being the longest, most expensive film that we did with the DOT. But I started really falling in love with scissor lifts. These hydraulic lifts, very stable platform, so we were able to like go up, 10, 15, 20 feet up in the air and park a camera up there, and an assistant usually. We'd let them down every once in a while. But so this is one of the images from Sandy. They ended up hiring us to document some of the salvage operation for that as well. And so like a moment later, like a dump truck drove over this. It's an old like kids' firehouse. Here's one of the workers. And this is the landfill. They were basically filling Robert Moses's parking lot full of the debris from the housing. So this brings me to my most recent project that I did. This was a commission from the New York Times Magazine. Nice little story about that is one of the films that I did for the New York Times got into a little bit of a financial crunch where it went from a 2-day shoot to a 6-day shoot. And at the end of it, we delivered the 6-day budget. And the editor was like, oh, it's a 2-day shoot. And I was like, but it went 6 days. And I'm like, no, we agreed to 2 days. And it's like, yeah, we agreed to 2 days, but it's now 6 days. So little finagling, we got it all worked out, got the crew paid. I basically ate, some of the money on that. But the New York Times nicely said, we owe you one. And I was like, really? Because I said, the one thing that I haven't done for you is I haven't done anything in print. And I would really love to be in the magazine itself. And so I was like, well, we've tried a couple of different projects, but they kept on getting killed because of security and access issues. But I'd read about this vessel being built and sent it to the Times, and they liked the idea of it, and then we sent it to Shell and spent a half a year on the phone with them back and forth about whether I'm like, that sounds great, we totally want to be in the magazine, we'll send you some pictures. And the New York Times was like, no. The only way this is going to happen is if you let Stephen Mallon in to shoot in the shipyard. And the New York Times was phenomenal about this. Like, they really had my back on it. They were never, because of the fact that I brought the idea to them, they never tried to work around it. And all in all, it worked out. Shell got me access through the shipyard. The shipyard agreed to it. We got all the media restrictions lifted from the shipyard and everything, with the special exception for the New York Times. And I spent a week in the shipyard in South Korea shooting the construction of the Prelude. The Prelude is the largest floating structure ever built by man. It is 1,500 feet long. It's a liquefied natural gas plant that is going to be docked off of the coast of Australia for 25 years, processing natural gas. It is basically a giant fracking plant out in the water. So it's a module system. So what they do is they build everything in components in like one shop here, and they put this together, and they put another piece here, and then they put another piece here, and then they put another piece here, and then another piece here. And so the day that we arrived to scout, actually, they were lowering this one section of one module onto the next. And so we were able to get there up in time and get this. These are the workers. They have these nice TBNs, which are toolbox meetings every single morning, and they do a little exercise and warm up. And I got yelled at after taking this photograph because they didn't want to ever display the workers in a bad light, but I think it's actually a really sweet image. So I also got permission to get up on top of the gantry crane. Another highlight of the shoot, everything was just being on top of this. This is a giant 6,000 ton capability gantry crane that's 15 stories up and everything, and a lot of climb. And that's the operator. This is one of the few times that I've actually also liked the fisheye lens, just because the ship was so huge, we couldn't get far enough away from it to shoot it from above. The piece that ended up running in the New York Times that I like the most is there's an actual interactive link to it where you're flying over the ship. They took all of the photographs that I shot from this other crane and put it together, and you can actually pan yourself in and zoom in to different sections of the Prelude. So what we did, there was the suggestion from Kathy Ryan, which was a great idea, was to stitch it together. And I normally don't ever stitch things together. I've never been big into doing gigantic landscapes with multiple photographs, but there was no other way to get the entire vessel into one piece, so we had to assemble it. And so we got on top of these gantry cranes, set up the camera, picture, 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 and we ended up shooting over 1,000 frames, and they stitched it together. And it kind of looks like time lapse, but it's not, because it's not exactly framed in that fashion. But it works out incredibly well. This app that they found on the Times magazine, definitely suggest to check it out. So I'm basically just like a kid in a candy store at this place. Like, it's just everywhere you turn, this location was phenomenal. There was like 35,000 people working here full time, if I remember correctly, and I was only allowed to shoot the Prelude. There's like all these other ships being built. There's like deep water drilling being built over here, and cargo ships there, and there's a destroyer, and but I had to stick to the Prelude. So I'm trying to get back. This is one of the shots from the boat. This is the first module that they were putting on the top side of the Prelude, and that was one of the reasons that it was kind of good timing, is because there was some monumental thing that was happening. And so this crane is, I believe, a 9,000 ton capability. It was built by the shipyard, which I just love. It's like, these guys are like basically this gigantic erector set, and they're like, oh, we need to build that, so we're just going to go ahead and like weld everything together, build an engine, and done. So just in comparison of lift capability, like the crane that pulled the Flight 1549 out of the out of the Hudson River, is 250 tons. It's a 1 million pound capability. This crane is 9,000 tons. And so they're picking up that structure, which is like, I think about 12 stories high. And then they picked it up from where we shot it from one crane, and then brought it over by barge, and then lowered it down and literally just like welded it in place. This is the bumper of the Prelude. I've just always liked this. This like megalithic, So again, this is one of the photographs that they stitched together for the Prelude. So one of the things that I just wanted to talk a little bit about is kind of like how this journey has, hooked itself together. I mean, I don't know if you saw like how this to this to this to this, but a lot of this has been built on relationships that I've had in New York that have just been developing over time. And part of that is through the photo community. I am the former president of ASMP New York. We have another board member in the audience, fortunately. Jason Gardner is here. So if you guys also have any other questions about ASMP, either of us can talk about it. But ASMP and community in general, I think, is really critical for photographers, because for people that came out of art school or some relevant, you had assignments and you had critiques and you had a chance to like get and look at your work and everything. And then when you get out of school, you lose some of that opportunity. And a couple of friends had set up crit groups where we would meet once a month, and we set up a schedule. It's like second Tuesday of the month. We always met at a studio, and everyone either talked about the work or didn't. And that fortunately got turned into an event through ASMP and became the Brain Trust group, where we'd help sponsor and organize meetings of photographers every month. It's a free member benefit. And I think it's really good. And you don't have to do it through ASMP. You can do it through any, through a meetup group or anything, but I think it's a really good way to get yourself looking at work and sticking to deadlines, because one of the trickiest things I think about doing any kind of creative work is finishing it. You can talk about it a lot, but actually, delivering and following through on some of the things that you're talking about doing, when you have someone else that notices that you haven't delivered, kind of puts a little bit of social pressure in there. And it's like, when you say, I'm going to get this promo done, and then next month you haven't, they're like, that's cool 1 month, but when 2 months go by, and you're like, oh yeah, I got busy, and I fell asleep, and it's like, no, you do have to discipline yourself to do that. And I think the crit groups are a way to kind of like, have a little bit of outside pressure on discipline at the same time. One of the other things I want to, mention is just about how the exhibitions have evolved. Like, it literally went from showing in someone's apartment at a group show out in Bed-Stuy, Clinton Hills somewhere, where they hung my photograph behind the coat rack, and I was really frustrated with that. But like picking up these tiny little shows, we did exhibitions at a friend's basement in Soho, and it just slowly evolved and stayed in contact with some of these people, because these people do evolve. Both, the photo editors change jobs, the interns become photo editors, the students, gain experience, gain access. And so just these relationships that you can build with people, if you stay in contact and build a community, you can all be moving forward. What are we doing on time? 2:07. So, speaking of ASMP, by the way, how many of you guys are members? Oh, good. Okay. You saw that the Fine Art Review is on the 18th. If any of you are interested, it's definitely a great event to start that relationship. Both, to see people you've seen before. You get 10 minutes. It's a meeting, speed dating setup. You do have to wait for the reviewers. We don't have a scheduling system in place yet. I would love to build one. We just haven't figured out a way to do it in a democratic way that is manageable. Because the smaller reviews, you can kind of go and just like put your name on a board and everything, but we haven't really figured that out. And also when someone cancels, how do you like rearrange those time frames and everything? And we can't, we want to be able to, for photographers to choose who they see instead of assigning it. We could assign everybody and then you see reviewers faster, but then you don't have control over who you're meeting with. And if someone takes longer, so it's still a wait time. So you end up with some time in line. But you know what? You've got a photographer behind you. You've got a photographer in front of you. I pointed the wrong direction, sorry. But you can sit there and while you're waiting with the reviewer, be talking to your colleagues. And you guys can be, looking at the work side by side, on the spot. And I have landed a lot of relationships through this, this portfolio review in particular. And I think it's very beneficial to meet people and start talking about work and showing it. And it is next week. All you need is a box of prints. So you can get those printed pretty much anywhere in time. There's enough time to buy a box and get prints made from that other place that will remain nameless on time for next week. They're very inexpensive digital C prints. If you calibrate your thing, turn off their color correction. If you know just a tiny bit about printing, it will be close enough to show it. They don't have to be huge. 16 by 20 or smaller is fine. Unless your work is video that you're trying to show, I would not recommend bringing a laptop. Because people respond to the presentation and showing work on a laptop is not a good way to show it unless that's how it's designed to be viewed. Most photographers actually want the prints up on the walls. And we're meeting at tables kind of like this. We're meeting at like 3 by 6 foot tables, so you don't have the room to hang out the big portfolio reviews. Are you guys familiar with the whole portfolio review industry that has launched? There are massive portfolio reviews going on now. There are traveling ones. There's one in LA. There's Paris Photo hosts one. There's the Florida Palm Springs Festival. They do one in Florida. They also do one during the Javits Center at the Expo. These are a pay and play situation. The reviewers are there. They're not paid much, but they are paid a little bit. Photographers buy the space to meet reviewers there, and then you are scheduling your appointments. It is a good time to make relationships that you may not be able to get to them otherwise. There's no guarantee that they're gonna love you, but you at least get a chance. And there are major people that are there. There's reviewers from the New York Times Magazine are there. We may have someone from the magazine next week at ASMP. Actually, I'm going to try to get one of my editors there. The other awesome review is actually the New York Times review. Is open right now. I'm seeing you nod. Do you know what the deadline is?
Yesterday.
Oh. Sorry. Keep an eye on that for the future if you didn't get a chance to submit to it. It's a juried one, but it is free, and it's just another great chance to meet editors. The Center Review in Santa Fe is juried. There's a small submission fee, and then if you get in, there's another fee. It's a little bit more expensive than some of the other reviews, but it is every year, and it is out in Santa Fe. So, you got to pay for your hotel, airfare, all this stuff. It's not cheap. But again, you're meeting some art dealers that you may not have access to on a personal basis. And a lot of these people go to different reviews, and a lot of these people are judges and get invited. So like the curator from the Santa Fe Museum will end up being a judge. And if they liked you, they will, possibly, remember you, either remind you or suggest, to possibly put you in. A lot of these people are doing juried shows for nonprofit organizations. That's another good place to reach out to. It's like the Photo Eye. People, Brooklyn Arts Council has got one. Not sure about Powerhouse. One of the issues that I have with Powerhouse is I don't think you're allowed to choose your reviewer. They assign them. And so you're paying about the same rate, but you're not allowed to pick who you want to meet with. And I don't think that makes sense, especially in the market now where you're able to choose who you meet with. PhotoFest is every other year in Texas. Photolacita is every other year in Portland, Maine. Portland, Oregon, excuse me, not Maine, Oregon. That's great, good coffee. Nice hotel, it's a little bit more relaxed. But PhotoFest is really good because there's European dealers, there's a lot of different festivals that will be there. The fence just opened up, which is getting juried by Avedon, I think, and probably a couple of other people. And that is going to travel to both Photoville and 3 other photo festivals. Has everyone been to Photoville? Everyone familiar with it? I think that it's a great organization, but the containers, you can submit a proposal to get the container, and then if you get it, you've got a solo show. And I know friends of mine that have been picked up for other events and shows by being in those containers or on the fence. So I think it's a great opportunity, again, if you have a body of work that may not be represented by a gallery. Like, I'm gonna submit for it because I have a project that we're working on with the Parks Department that I don't think is gonna end up at my gallery, but we're gonna try to get a container for it. So again, it's a nice thing that United Photo Industries has done. And Sam, Laura, and Dave are just wonderful people, the people that are running that festival. So I think it's definitely worth submitting for their competitions and for getting a container. And all of this is just outreach. It's like, it's fishing. It is constantly trying to get a lead, hooking on a job, on an exhibition, on a talk. It is all these little pieces. You just don't know when things are going to connect. We have sold prints by hanging the work in the restaurants. And the only reason that I did the restaurant show was because the guy that owned the restaurant had already bought some work from me. I'm not a huge fan of restaurant shows, but it did end up selling some work for me. One of the issues about restaurant shows is that people typically don't go to restaurants to look at art. The same thing in hotels and lobbies and everything. That being said, it does start getting exposure. There are people that are organizing juried shows for exhibitions. The real estate people are putting up pop-up shows to fill space. And when you start finding these people and staying in contact with them through these portfolio reviews, you've got possible opportunities to show your work. And there's also online exhibitions. Humble Arts just put up the latest group show, and I think they're at like 49 or something. It's 2 guys that have been running it on their own for years. I was in like group show number 9, and they have got a decent following. They now have full nonprofit status. It's Humble Arts Foundation if you want to write them down. Adhesive is also a good commercial networking platform. It's mostly to find assistants. The clients on the hiring side, I think, stay away from it because it's so saturated with photographers. But if you need to meet other photographers or need assisting work or need to meet assistants, it's a good place. It's a monthly happy hour. They just rotate it from bar to bar, either in Manhattan or Brooklyn. Facebook, email list, just sign up for it. They just launched one in LA, and they've also become an ad agency, which is one of the strangest things. Like, this was a happy hour that we've been going to for the past 5 years, and they're now landed themselves as a branding agency because one of the main people is an art buyer from McCann that is now, they've launched their own agency. So we'll see where that goes. You guys. Thank you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.